When a runaway railroad heiress weds a humble stablehand, love defies power and wealth. But can they outrun a father's wrath and a past that won't stay buried? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching. From today, the sun beat down on Micah Boone's back as he shoveled soiled hay from the Calder stables. Sweat dripped from his brow, and he paused to wipe it with his sleeve. At 27, his body was strong from years of labor, but his eyes held a weariness that came from seeing too much during the war. "Looks like hard work." Micah turned at the sound of the soft voice. A young woman stood in the doorway of the stable, her face half hidden in shadow. She wore a simple dress and a worn shawl, nothing like the fancy clothes the rich ladies in town paraded around in. "It's honest work," he replied, leaning on his shovel. "Better than some I've done." She stepped forward, and he noticed she carried a cloth-covered basket. "I thought you might be hungry. It's fresh bread from town." Micah hesitated. No one brought food to the hired help, especially not young women who should be concerned with proper behavior. "Thank you, miss, but please call me Eva," she said, setting the basket down on a hay bale. "And you don't have to worry. I'm just the daughter of a clerk in town. My father works for Mr. Calder's company." That explained it. She wasn't one of the high society ladies after all, just a working man's daughter with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I'm Micah Boone," he said, wiping his hands on his pants before accepting the bread she offered. "This is mighty kind of you." "Do you like working with the horses?" she asked, reaching out to stroke the nose of a chestnut mare. "They're honest creatures," Micah said. "They don't care what you did before or who you were. They just care how you treat them now." Eva looked at him with curious eyes. "You talk about horses like they're people. Sometimes they're better than people," he said with a slight smile. "No offense meant." "None taken," she laughed. "I think I might agree with you." That was the first time Micah Boone met Eva. He didn't know then that this quiet girl with thoughtful questions would change his life forever. He just knew that for the first time since coming back from the war, someone had looked at him and really seen him. Eva came back the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes with bread or a jar of honey, sometimes with nothing but questions about the horses and his day. She never stayed long, just enough time for Micah to look forward to her next visit. "Have you always worked with horses?" she asked one afternoon as she watched him brush down a stallion. "No, ma'am," he said, his stroke steady and even. "I was a soldier once, fought for the Union." "The war," she said softly. "Was it very terrible?" Most people asked if he'd killed anyone or wanted to hear stories of glory. No one ever asked if it was terrible. "Yes," he said simply. "Lost my brother at Gettysburg. After that, I didn't see much point in fighting anymore." Eva was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry about your brother." "Thank you," he said. "His name was Joshua. He was a better man than me." "I doubt that's true," she said, and there was something in her voice that made him look up. Her eyes held his for a moment before she glanced away. As the weeks passed, their talks grew longer. Eva would sit on a hay bale while Micah worked, telling him about books she'd read or asking about places he'd been. She never talked much about herself, but Micah didn't mind. It was enough to have someone listen to him. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the stable in gold, Eva stayed later than usual. Micah had finished his chores and was about to head to his small room above the carriage house when she appeared at the door. "I brought dinner," she said, holding up a basket. "If you're hungry." They sat in the hayloft, the lantern between them casting long shadows on the walls. Eva had brought fried chicken, cornbread, and apple pie. Food that reminded Micah of home before the war. "This is the best meal I've had in years," he said, savoring each bite. "I made it myself," she said, looking pleased. "Well, except the pie. Mrs. Cooper at the bakery made that." "You cook too?" Micah asked. "I thought clerks' daughters had cooks." Eva looked away quickly. "We're not that kind of family. I do most of the cooking at home." As the night grew deeper, they talked about everything and nothing. Eva asked about his family farm in Ohio, and Micah found himself telling her stories he hadn't shared with anyone since Joshua died. "Sometimes I think about going back," he admitted, "but without Joshua, it wouldn't be the same." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Eva asked, her face serious in the lantern light. Micah thought for a moment. I'd have a small place, nothing fancy. Just enough land for a few horses. Maybe grow some corn, raise some cattle. He looked at her. What about you? What would you do if you could do anything? Eva's smile faded a little. I'd like to see the ocean. I've read about it in books, but I've never seen it. You've never seen the ocean? Micah was surprised. No, she said. I haven't been many places. Well, that's a shame, he said. Everyone should see the ocean at least once. As the weeks turned to months, Micah found himself living for Eva's visits. She brought light into his quiet life, made him laugh when he'd forgotten how. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he fell in love with her. He saw it in the way his heart leapt when she appeared at the stable door, felt it in the emptiness of the days when she didn't come, knew it when he caught himself watching the road to town, hoping to see her walking toward him. But Micah Boone was a practical man. What could he offer a girl like Eva? He had nothing but his name and the wages he earned tending horses that belonged to someone else. Still, when she smiled at him, he let himself dream. One crisp autumn day, Eva arrived at the stable looking troubled. Her usual smile was missing, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if worried someone might see her. Is everything all right? Micah asked, setting down the saddle he was repairing. Yes, she said quickly. I can't stay long today. Your father needs you at home. A shadow crossed her face. Something like that. She hesitated, then said in a rush, My father is talking about sending me back east to visit relatives. I might be gone for a while. Micah felt his heart sink. How long is a while? I don't know, she said, twisting her hands together. Maybe forever. Forever. The word felt like a stone in his throat. Why would he send you away forever? Eva looked away. He has plans for me. Plans I don't want. What kind of plans? The kind that don't include... She paused, looking at him with eyes that seemed on the verge of tears. The kind that don't include what I want. Micah stepped closer to her, closer than he'd ever dared before. And what do you want, Eva? Her eyes met his, and for a moment everything else fell away. I want to be free to choose my own life, to be with someone who sees me for who I really am. Micah's heart hammered in his chest. And who are you really? Just Eva, she whispered. Just a girl who brings bread to the stablehand and talks too much about books. Without thinking, Micah reached out and took her hand. It was small and soft in his calloused palm. I like that girl, he said softly. I like her very much. Eva's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. You do? More than I should, he admitted. More than is proper for a man in my position. What position is that? She asked. A man with nothing to his name but the clothes on his back and whatever he can earn with his hands. Eva squeezed his fingers. That sounds like a man who knows the value of hard work, the value of honesty. Her voice grew softer. The kind of man a girl might dream about when no one's looking. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Micah wanted to pull her close, to tell her not to go east, to stay here with him. But what right did he have to ask such a thing? When do you leave? He asked instead. I don't know yet, she said, but soon, I think. Will you come say goodbye before you go? Eva's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to say goodbye, Micah. Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Then she turned and hurried away, leaving Micah standing alone in the stable, his heart racing and his cheek burning where her lips had touched him. That night, Micah couldn't sleep. He paced the small room above the carriage house, thinking about Eva and her talk of going east. The thought of never seeing her again made his chest ache, in a way he hadn't felt since losing Joshua. For days, Micah waited for Eva to return, but the stable door remained empty. Each passing hour without her made his decision clearer. He couldn't let her go without telling her how he felt. Even if she laughed at him, even if she said no, he had to try. On the 5th day, as dusk settled over the Calder estate, Micah made his way to the main house. He'd never been this close to it before. A grand building with white columns and windows that glowed like gold in the setting sun. A house built on railroad money, on the backs of men like him. He stood at the edge of the garden, unsure what to do next. He couldn't just walk up to the front door and ask for Eva. He didn't even know her last name or where her father lived in town. As he was about to turn back, a movement caught his eye. A figure in a pale dress, walking alone in the garden. Eva. But something was different. Her hair was styled in an elegant twist, and her dress wasn't the simple cotton she usually wore to the stables. This was fine silk that caught the last rays of sun. Micah stepped forward, confusion slowing his steps. "Eva?" She turned, her face registering shock and then something like fear. "Micah, what are you doing here?" "I came looking for you," he said, moving closer. "You never came back to the stable. I was worried." "You shouldn't be here," she said, glancing nervously at the house. "If someone sees you—" "I don't care," Micah said. "I need to talk to you before you go east." Eva looked at him for a long moment, then took his hand. "Not here," she whispered. "Follow me." She led him through the garden to a small gazebo hidden behind a row of tall hedges. Once inside, she turned to face him, her eyes troubled. "You really shouldn't be here," she said. "If my father finds out—" "Your father," Micah interrupted. "The clerk in town who works for Calder?" Eva looked away. "Yes." "Then why are you here, at the main house, and dressed like—" He gestured at her silk dress, at the pearl bracelet, on her wrist that he'd never noticed before. "Micah," she began, then stopped. She took a deep breath. "There are things about me you don't know." "Then tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a fear he didn't understand. "I'm afraid if I do, you'll hate me." "I could never hate you, Eva," he said, taking her hands in his. "Nothing you could say would change how I feel about you." "How do you feel about me?" she whispered. Micah took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I love you," he said simply. "I love the way you talk about books like they're old friends. I love how you treat the horses with respect. I love your smile and your laugh, and the way you see the good in everything." He squeezed her hands. "I know I have no right to say these things. I know I have nothing to offer you except my heart and my hands. But I had to tell you before you went away." Tears spilled down Eva's cheeks. "Oh, Micah," she said. "I love you, too, more than I ever thought possible." Joy surged through Micah's chest, so strong it almost hurt. "Then don't go east," he said. "Stay here. Stay with me." "It's not that simple," she said, pulling her hands away. "My father—" "We'll talk to him together," Micah said. "I'll tell him my intentions are honorable, that I'll work hard to provide for you." Eva shook her head. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," he pleaded. Eva turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. When she spoke, her voice was so low he had to lean in to hear her. "My name isn't just Eva," she said. "It's Evangeline." She turned to face him, her chin raised slightly. "Evangeline Calder." The name hit Micah like a physical blow. Calder. Not the daughter of a clerk who worked for Calder, but Calder herself. The daughter of Silas Calder, the railroad tycoon whose name was on Micah's paycheck. "You're—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm Silas Calder's daughter," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "The only child of the man who owns these stables, this house, half the town." Micah stepped back, his mind reeling. "Why did you lie to me?" "Because no one has ever looked at me the way you do," she said. "To everyone else, I'm Evangeline Calder, the railroad princess, a name, a fortune, a way to get to my father." Her voice broke. "But with you, I was just Eva, a girl who could bring you bread and talk about books, a girl you could love for herself, not for her father's money." Micah ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. "So there's no trip east?" "No," she admitted. "But there is a marriage being arranged. My father wants me to marry Senator Harrison's son, Charles. The wedding is set for spring." "And you were going to tell me this when?" Micah asked, anger beginning to replace shock. "I don't know," she said. "I tried to find the words, but I was afraid you'd look at me differently once you knew who I really was." "The way I'm looking at you now?" he asked bitterly. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Like that." Micah turned away, his thoughts in chaos. However, no, Evangeline was Silas Calder's daughter, the man who controlled more money than Micah would see in 10 lifetimes, and she was promised to a senator's son. "I should go," he said stiffly. "Micah, please." She reached for his arm. "Nothing has changed. I'm still the same person who sat with you in the hayloft, who asked about your brother, who loves you." He looked down at her hand on his arm, at the pearl bracelet that probably cost more than his yearly wages. "Everything has changed," he said. "You're Evangeline Calder. I'm the man who cleans your father's stables." "I don't care about that," she insisted. "Maybe you don't," he said. "But the world does. Your father does." "Then we'll leave," she said, suddenly. "Tonight, we'll go somewhere new, somewhere no one knows the Calder name." Micah stared at her. "You'd leave all this?" He gestured at the grand house, the manicured gardens. "For me?" In a heartbeat, she said without hesitation. "None of this has ever made me happy. But you do." Before Micah could respond, a voice called from the house. "Evangeline, where are you, child? Dinner is waiting." Fear flashed across her face. "That's my father. You have to go." "Eva," he began. "Meet me tomorrow night," she whispered urgently. "At the old oak by Miller's Creek. Midnight, please, Micah, say you'll come." He hesitated only a moment. "I'll be there." "Go now," she said, pushing him toward the garden. "Quickly." Micah slipped away through the hedges, his heart pounding. As he made his way back to the carriage house, his mind was a storm of confusion and hope and fear. Evangeline Calder, the daughter of the railroad king, the woman promised to a senator's son, the woman who loved him. As he lay in his narrow bed that night, Micah wondered if he was a fool to believe they could have a future together. What could he offer the daughter of Silas Calder? A life of struggle and hardship, so different from the luxury she'd always known. But then he remembered the look in her eyes when she'd said she loved him, the way she'd said she'd leave it all behind in a heartbeat. Tomorrow at midnight he would know if Evangeline truly meant what she said, if she was willing to choose a Stablehand over the empire her father had built. As sleep finally claimed him, Micah's last thought was of Eva's smile. Not Evangeline Calder with her pearls and silk dresses, but Eva, the girl who brought bread to the stables and asked him about his dreams. The girl who, against all odds, had stolen his heart. The day after his discovery of Eva's true identity dragged on endlessly for Micah. He went through his chores mechanically, brushing horses and mucking stalls while his mind raced with questions. Could he trust her? Had anything she told him been true? And most importantly, would she really meet him at midnight? Or was this just a way to let him down gently? As darkness fell over the Calder estate, Micah finished his work early. He washed up carefully using the cold water from the pump behind the carriage house. He put on his cleanest shirt, the one he saved for Sundays, and combed his hair with extra care. In the small wooden box where he kept his few possessions, Micah found a length of leather he'd been saving. His fingers, skilled from years of working with horses, began to weave the strands together into a complex braid. As he worked, he thought about Eva, or Evangeline as the rest of the world knew her. He thought about her laugh, her kindness, the way she looked at him like he mattered. Not once had she treated him like a servant. Had that been an act, or was that the real Eva, hiding behind the Calder name? By 11 o'clock, the braided leather was finished. Micah tucked it into his pocket and slipped out into the night. The moon was nearly full, lighting his path as he made his way across the Calder property and into the woods that separated the estate from Miller's Creek. The old oak was a local landmark, its massive trunk so wide that 3 men together couldn't wrap their arms around it. Micah arrived early and waited in its shadow, his heart pounding every time a twig snapped or leaves rustled in the night breeze. What if she didn't come? What if this was all some kind of cruel joke? But as the church bell in town struck midnight, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Evangeline, wore a dark cloak over a simple dress, not unlike the ones she had worn to the stables. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, not pinned up in the fancy style he'd seen at the main house. "Micah," she called softly, "are you here?" He stepped out from the shadow of the oak. "I'm here." She ran to him then, throwing herself into his arms with such force that he nearly stumbled backward. "You came," she whispered against his chest. "I was so afraid you wouldn't." "I said I would," he replied, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. It smelled of roses, not hay and horses like the Eva he knew from the stables. Another reminder of the difference between them. He gently pushed her back so he could see her face in the moonlight. "I need to know the truth, Ava, all of it." She nodded, taking his hands in hers. "My name is Evangeline Calder. I'm the only child of Silas Calder. Everything else I told you was true." Her eyes pleaded with him to believe her. Every feeling, every conversation, every moment we shared was real. "Why did you come to the stables that first day?" he asked. "I saw you from my window," she admitted. "You were so gentle with the horses, so different from the men my father brought to the house, men who smiled to my face and calculated my worth behind my back." She squeezed his hands. "I wanted to know you, and once I did, I couldn't stay away." "But why lie about who you were?" "Because no one has ever seen me as just a person before," she said. "I've always been the Calder heiress, a prize to be won, a path to my father's fortune." Tears filled her eyes. "With you, I could be just Eva, and for the first time in my life, I felt real." Micah looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was the same Eva who had sat with him in the hayloft, who had asked about his dreams, who had kissed his cheek before running away. "What about Senator Harrison's son?" he asked. "The marriage your father arranged?" Eva's face hardened. "Charles Harrison is a cruel man who hides behind good manners and his father's name. He wants my father's railroad connections, not me." She looked up at Micah with determination. "I will not marry him. Not for all the railroads in the West. What will you do?" "That depends on you," she said softly, "on whether you can forgive me for not telling you the whole truth. On whether you still—" She hesitated, suddenly vulnerable. "On whether you still love me now that you know who I really am." Micah took a deep breath. He had spent all day wrestling with that very question. Did he love Eva, the simple girl who brought him bread? Or was it Evangeline Calder, the railroad princess who had captured his heart? Looking at her now, he realized they were one and the same. The kindness in her eyes, the gentle strength in her voice, those belonged to both Eva and Evangeline. "Love you," he said finally. "I think I loved you from the first moment you stepped into that stable. Nothing has changed that." Relief washed over her face. "Then let's leave," she said eagerly. "Tonight. We can take 2 of the horses from the stable, ride south, start a new life where no one knows the Calder name." "Wait," Micah said, reaching into his pocket. "Before we decide anything, I need to ask you something." He pulled out the braided leather he had made earlier that night. It was simple but beautiful, the strands woven together in an intricate pattern. "I don't have much to offer you," he said, his voice low and serious. "No fancy house, no fortune, just my hands and my heart. But both are yours if you'll have them." He held out the braided leather. "Ava, Evangeline, will you marry me?" Ava looked at the leather bracelet, then back at Micah's face. Without hesitation, she held out her wrist. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes." Micah tied the bracelet around her wrist, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "It's not pearls or diamonds," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's better," she said, admiring it in the moonlight. "You made it with your own hands, like the life we'll build together." She reached up and kissed him then, a real kiss this time, not the quick peck on the cheek she had given him before. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We need to go now," she said, "before anyone realizes I'm gone." "Where will we go?" Micah asked. "There's a circuit rider, Reverend Jenkins, who camps by the river during his rounds," Eva said. "He'll marry us. Then we can head south, across the state line, where my father's influence doesn't reach." "You've thought this through," Micah said, impressed. "I've been planning my escape for longer than you know," she admitted. "I just never thought I'd have someone to escape with." Hand in hand, they made their way back to the Calder estate. The stables were dark and quiet as they slipped inside. Micah quickly saddled 2 horses, his own gelding and a gentle mare that Eva had often brought carrots to. "What about your things?" he asked as he tightened the cinch on the saddle. "I packed a bag this afternoon," she said, pulling a small bundle from beneath her cloak. "Just the essentials. And this." She patted a small pouch at her waist. "Some money I've been saving. Not much, but enough to get us started." As they led the horses quietly from the stable, Micah couldn't help looking back at the carriage house, where he had lived for the past year. It wasn't much, but it had been home. Now he was leaving everything behind for a woman he had known for only a few months, a woman who had lied to him about who she was. But as Ava mounted her horse with the easy grace of someone who had been riding since childhood, Micah knew he was making the right choice. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They rode through the night, keeping to the shadows of trees and avoiding the main roads. Eva led the way, confident in the darkness. She had clearly ridden these paths before, probably during her secret visits to the stable. As dawn broke over the hills, they reached a small clearing by the river. A simple wagon was parked beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, and a thin curl of smoke rose from a small campfire. "Reverend Jenkins?" Eva called softly as they approached. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes emerged from the wagon. "Who calls?" he asked, peering at them in the early morning light. "Friends in need of your services," Eva replied, dismounting gracefully. "What services might those be, young lady?" the Reverend asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "We wish to be married," Micah said, coming to stand beside Eva. "Today, if possible." Reverend Jenkins looked them over carefully. "Runaway, are you?" he asked Eva directly. She lifted her chin. "Running towards something, not away," she corrected. The old man chuckled. "Well said." He gestured to the campfire. "Come, break your fast with me, and we'll talk about this marriage of yours." Over a simple meal of coffee and cornbread, Eva and Micah told their story, or parts of it. They left out Eva's last name and her father's identity, saying only that her family disapproved of her choice. "They had another man picked out for me," she explained, "a man I could never love. And you, young man," the Reverend turned to Micah. "What's your stake in this?" "I love her," Micah said simply. "I want to give her a good life, a happy life. Even though it means giving up everything familiar. She is my everything now," Micah replied, taking Eva's hand. "Where she goes, I go." Reverend Jenkins studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Love like that doesn't come along every day," he said. "It would be a sin to stand in its way." He rose from his seat by the fire. "Let me get my Bible." The wedding ceremony was simple and quick. They stood beneath the cottonwood trees with the river flowing behind them and the morning sun dappling the ground through the leaves. Ava wore the same dress she had arrived in. There was no veil, no flowers, no witnesses except the birds and the horses grazing nearby. "Do you, Micah Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Jenkins asked, his voice solemn. "I do," Micah said, his eyes never leaving Eva's face. "And do you?" The Reverend paused, looking at Eva questioningly. "Eva," she said firmly. "Just Eva." The old man raised an eyebrow but continued. "Do you, Eva, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, squeezing Micah's hands. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Jenkins smiled. "You may kiss your bride, young man." Micah leaned down and kissed Eva tenderly, sealing their vows with a promise that needed no words. After the ceremony, Reverend Jenkins provided them with a simple marriage certificate. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it's legal and binding." "It's perfect," Ava said, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into her bag. They thanked the Reverend, leaving him with a few coins from Eva's savings as both payment and donation. Then they mounted their horses and continued south, husband and wife riding toward a new beginning. By nightfall, they had crossed into the next county, where the Calder name was known but carried less weight. They found a small boarding house in a town called Willow Springs and took a room as Mr. and Mrs. Boone. The room was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. It was a far cry from the luxury Eva had known all her life, but she looked around with delight. "Our first home," she said, setting her bag on the bed. Micah watched her nervously, half expecting her to show some sign of regret or disappointment. But Eva moved around the small space with the same grace she had shown in her father's grand house, touching the simple cotton curtains with the same appreciation she might show fine silk. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, as she washed her face in the basin. "It's not too late to go back. Your father would forgive you. You could still have the life you were meant to have." Eva dried her face and turned to him, her eyes serious. "This is the life I was meant to have, Micah, with you." She came to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. "I've never been more sure of anything." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. "I'll make you happy," he promised. "Somehow I'll give you a good life." "You already have," she whispered against his chest. That night they lay together as husband and wife, learning each other in the moonlight that spilled through the small window. Eva's skin was soft against Micah's calloused hands, her body yielding and new. They moved together like dancers finding a rhythm, awkward at first, then with growing confidence and joy. Afterward, as Eva slept curled against him, Micah watched the rise and fall of her chest and marveled at the turn his life had taken. A month ago, he had been a lonely stablehand, with nothing but memories of war and a lost brother. Now he was a husband, responsible for this beautiful woman who had given up everything to be with him. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. He would need to find work, make a home for them, protect Eva from the consequences of their choices. But looking at her peaceful face in the moonlight, Micah knew he would do whatever it took to be worthy of her trust. The next morning, they ventured into town to buy supplies and learn about work opportunities. Willow Springs was a growing town with a lumber mill and several shops. Micah hoped his experience with horses might land him a job at the livery stable or as a driver for one of the local businesses. While Eva waited outside the general store, Micah went to inquire about work at the lumber mill. As he passed the sheriff's office, a notice on the bulletin board caught his eye. He stopped, not quite believing what he was seeing. There, tacked to the board among wanted posters and announcements of town meetings, was a large notice with a sketch of Eva's face. "Missing Evangeline Calder, daughter of Rail King Silas Calder. $1,000 reward for her safe return." The notice described Evangeline as 23 years old, with dark hair and blue eyes. It stated she had disappeared from her father's estate 2 nights ago and might be in the company of a former stable employee. $1,000. More money than Micah could hope to earn in years of honest work. Enough to tempt anyone who recognized Eva. His heart pounding, Micah quickly glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then tore the notice from the board and stuffed it into his pocket. They would have to leave Willow Springs immediately. It wasn't safe. He hurried back to the general store, trying to keep his face calm as he approached Eva, who was admiring a display of fabric in the window. "We need to go," he said quietly, taking her arm. "Now." Eva looked up at him in surprise. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "Not here," Micah said, guiding her away from the store and back toward the boarding house. "I'll explain when we're alone." Once they were safely back in their room, Micah pulled the notice from his pocket and handed it to Eva. "Your father is looking for you." Eva stared at the paper, her face growing pale. $1,000, she whispered. "He's offering $1,000 for my return." "We have to leave," Micah said, already gathering their few belongings. "Someone will recognize you. It's not safe here." Eva sat heavily on the bed, still holding the notice. "I knew he would look for me," she said, "but I didn't think he would go this far." She looked up at Micah, fear in her eyes. "He won't stop, Micah. He'll keep searching until he finds me." Micah knelt before her, taking the notice from her hands and crumpling it. "Then we'll keep moving," he said firmly. "South maybe, or west, somewhere his money can't reach." "And then what?" Eva asked. "We spend our lives running, looking over our shoulders?" "If that's what it takes," Micah said. "I won't let him take you back against your will." Eva touched his face gently. "I knew my choice would have consequences," she said. "I chose you anyway, and I would choose you again." She straightened her shoulders. "We'll face this together." They left Willow Springs within the hour, riding west toward the mountains. They traveled all day, stopping only to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of bread and cheese bought at the general store before they fled. As the sun began to set, they found a sheltered spot near a stream to make camp for the night. Micah built a small fire while Eva tended to the horses. We'll need to be careful with fires from now on, Micah said, as he fed small branches into the flames. The smoke might attract attention. Eva nodded, sitting beside him on a fallen log. How far do you think we'll need to go? She asked. I don't know, Micah admitted. Your father's railroads cover a lot of territory. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Finally, Micah pulled the crumpled notice from his pocket. I need to ask you something, he said, smoothing the paper on his knee. And I need you to tell me the truth. Eva tensed slightly but nodded. Of course. Micah looked at her, his eyes serious in the firelight. Did you think I'd stop loving you if I knew who your father was? The question hung between them, waited, with all the unspoken fears and doubts of the past 2 days. Eva was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. No, she said finally. I didn't think you'd stop loving me, but I was afraid you might not start in the first place. She looked down at her hands, at the braided leather bracelet on her wrist. I was afraid you'd see the Calder name and nothing else, that you'd treat me differently, the way everyone else does. The way I'm treating you now? Micah asked softly. Eva looked up quickly. No, she said. You're still looking at me the same way, like I'm just Eva. Because that's who you are to me, Micah said. Not Evangeline Calder with her pearl earrings and silk dresses. Just Eva, the woman who brought bread to the stables and talked about wanting to see the ocean. He took her hand. The woman I fell in love with. Eva's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, she whispered. I was scared and selfish. I wanted to keep being just Eva for as long as I could. You told me everything but your name, Micah said, echoing the words from the crumpled poster. The rest was real. All of it, she promised. Every word, every feeling. Micah pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Then that's all that matters, he said. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They sat together by the fire, planning their next steps. They would need new names, a story to explain who they were and where they came from. They would need to find a place far enough from Silas Calder's influence to build a life together. As the fire burned down to embers, Eva yawned, the exhaustion of their journey catching up to her. Micah spread their bedrolls close together and they lay down, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. Micah, Eva murmured, already half asleep. Thank you for not sending me back. He tightened his arm around her. Wild horses. Couldn't drag you away from me, he promised. As Eva's breathing deepened into sleep, Micah stared up at the stars visible through the tree branches. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Silas Calder was a powerful man with long reach and deep pockets. But looking down at the woman in his arms, Micah knew he would face whatever came. For Eva. For the life they would build together. For the love that had brought them to this moment, sleeping under the stars, running from one world and toward another. 3. Weeks had passed since Micah and Eva fled Willow Springs. They traveled mostly at night, avoiding main roads and larger towns, where Silas Calder's missing person notices might be posted. During the day, they camped in hidden spots, always alert for the sound of approaching riders. Their money was running low. Eva had brought what she could, but it wouldn't last forever. They needed to find a place to settle, at least for a while. We can't keep running forever, Micah said one evening as they sat by a small smokeless fire. We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere I can find work. Eva nodded, her face thin and tired from weeks on the trail. The fine silk dresses she'd once worn were a distant memory. Now she wore simple cotton, her hands no longer soft but reddened from washing clothes in cold streams and cooking over campfires. Yet not once had she complained. Not once had she looked at Micah with regret in her eyes. What about that town we passed yesterday, she suggested. Copper Creek? It seemed small enough that news might not travel there so quickly. Micah considered it. Copper Creek was a tiny mining settlement tucked into a valley, far from any railroad lines. It might be the perfect place to disappear for a while. It's worth a try, he agreed. We could say we're newlyweds looking for a fresh start. We are newlyweds looking for a fresh start, Eva pointed out with a smile. Micah pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "That we are, Mrs. Boone, that we are." The next morning they rode into Copper Creek. It was even smaller than they remembered, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a cluster of houses. A few men in dusty clothes stood outside the saloon, eyeing the newcomers with mild curiosity. Micah led the way to the general store, where a gray-haired woman was sweeping the porch. "Morning," Micah called, dismounting and helping Eva down from her horse. "Wonder if you might know of any work available in town, or a place where my wife and I might stay." The woman leaned on her broom, looking them over. "Depends on what kind of work you're looking for," she said. "Mine's always hiring, but it's dangerous work and doesn't pay what it should." "I'm good with horses," Micah offered, "and my hands can turn to most anything that needs doing." The woman's eyes softened slightly. "Well, now that's fortunate. Old man Jenkins just broke his leg last week and his livery stable's been sitting idle. He might be willing to take on help." She pointed down the street. "Last building on the left. Can't miss it." "Thank you, ma'am," Micah said, tipping his hat. "And about a place to stay?" "Widow Barrett rents rooms in her house," the woman replied. "White house with blue shutters just past the church. Tell her Martha sent you." With directions in hand, Micah and Eva made their way to the livery stable. It was a well-built structure, with a small corral behind it and a room above where the owner presumably lived. An older man sat in a chair outside, his leg propped up on a crate and wrapped in a bulky splint. "Mr. Jenkins," Micah called as they approached. The old man squinted at them. "Who's asking?" "Name's Micah Boone. This is my wife, Eva." Micah stepped forward, offering his hand. "Heard you might be in need of some help around the stable," Jenkins grunted, shaking Micah's hand with a firm grip despite his age. "Might be. You know horses?" "Yes, sir. Worked with them most of my life." "Where'd you come from?" Micah had prepared for this question. "Missouri, originally. We've been traveling, looking for a place to settle." The old man's eyes moved to Eva, noting her smooth hands and straight posture, small tells of her genteel upbringing that no amount of rough living could erase completely. "How your wife don't look like she's from farm country," he observed. Eva stepped forward, meeting the old man's gaze directly. "My father was a clerk in St. Louis," she said, the lie coming easily now after weeks of practice. "But I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Jenkins, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Jenkins studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, I ain't in a position to be picky," he admitted, gesturing to his splintered leg. "Doc says I'll be laid up for at least 2 months. Stable's losing money every day it sits idle." "I can start right away," Micah offered. "Pays not much," Jenkins warned. $30 a month, plus you can have the room upstairs while I'm staying with my daughter." It was less than Micah had made at the Calder estate, but it was honest work and a roof over their heads. "That'll do fine, sir." "Thank you." They shook hands on the deal, and by that afternoon, Micah and Eva had moved their few belongings into the small room above the stable. It was simple. Just a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small stove, but it was clean and dry. "Our second home," Eva said, echoing her words from the boarding house in Willow Springs. She looked around with the same appreciation she had shown then, seeing possibilities where others might see only poverty. That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed, Eva whispered, "Do you think we're safe here?" Micah pulled her closer. "For now," he said. "It's far from any railroad lines. News travels slow to places like this." "I like it here," Eva said, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. "It's quiet, simple." "It's not what you're used to," Micah pointed out. Eva raised herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Micah Boone, when will you believe that I don't want what I was used to? That all I want is you and a life we build together?" He smiled up at her in the darkness. "When you've been saying it for 50 years and I still wake up every morning amazed that you're beside me." She laughed softly and settled back against him. "That can be arranged." Days turned into weeks, and Copper Creek began to feel like home. Micah worked hard at the livery stable, earning a reputation as a skilled horseman and an honest worker. Eva found ways to contribute, keeping the stable's books in order and taking in mending from town residents who quickly discovered her neat stitches and quick fingers. They made friends cautiously, the minister and his wife, the blacksmith who admired Micah's work with difficult horses, the schoolteacher who loaned Eva books from the small-town library. They were careful about their past, sticking to their story of being newlyweds from Missouri looking for a fresh start. Sometimes Eva would catch Micah watching her as she cooked their simple meals or washed clothes in the basin, a look of wonder on his face. "What?" she would ask, smiling. "Just wondering when you're going to realize you married a penniless stablehand and run back to your silk dresses and servants," he would tease, though there was always a hint of real fear behind the words. "My silk dresses were like cages," she would reply, "and the servants were my jailers watching my every move, reporting back to my father." She would come to him then, flour on her hands or soap bubbles on her arms, and kiss him soundly. "This is freedom, Micah. This is the life I choose." As their second month in Copper Creek drew to a close, they began to believe they might have escaped Silas Calder's reach. Perhaps he had given up the search. Perhaps Evangeline Calder was just a memory now, replaced completely by Eva Boone, the stablehand's wife. It was a cool autumn morning when the illusion of safety shattered. Micah was in the corral, working with a spirited mare, when he heard the rumble of approaching wagons. He looked up to see 3 well-appointed carriages rolling down Copper Creek's dusty main street. The carriages were finer than anything the small town had ever seen, with polished wood and brass fittings that gleamed in the morning sun. They came to a stop outside the general store, and several men in city clothes stepped down. Micah's heart froze in his chest. He recognized one of the men immediately. Alexander Reed, Silas Calder's head of security, the man who had once hired Micah to work in the Calder stables. "Eva," Micah called urgently, heading for the stable where his wife was sweeping the floor. "Eva, we need to go, now." She looked up, alarmed by the tone of his voice. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Your father's men," Micah said, already gathering their few possessions. "They're here." The color drained from Eva's face. "How did they find us?" "It doesn't matter. We need to—" But it was too late. The stable door swung open, and Alexander Reed stood there, flanked by 2 other men. His gaze passed over Micah and fixed on Eva. "Miss Calder," he said, his voice formal and cold, "your father will be relieved to know you're safe." Eva moved, to stand beside Micah, her hand finding his. "My name is Eva Boone now," she said, "and you can tell my father I'm exactly where I want to be." Reed's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid Mr. Calder insists on your return," he said. "He's very concerned about your welfare." "My welfare is my husband's concern now," Eva replied, her voice steady despite the trembling Micah could feel in her hand. The word husband caused a flicker of surprise on Reed's face. "I see," he said. "That complicates matters." He turned to Micah. "Mr. Boone, I think it would be best if you and I discuss this situation privately. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my wife," Micah said firmly. Reed sighed. "Very well. Mr. Calder is prepared to be generous. He understands that young people sometimes make impulsive decisions. He's offering you $5,000 to annul this marriage and return Miss Calder to her family." Micah felt Eva's hand tighten on his. $5,000. More money than he would ever see in a lifetime of honest work. Enough to buy land, build a house, start a real life? "No," he said. The word simple and final. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You haven't even considered the offer." "I don't need to," Micah replied. "Eva is my wife. She's not for sale." "10,000 then," Reed said, as if Micah had merely been negotiating. "A very generous sum for a man in your position." "My answer is still no." Reed's face hardened. "Mr. Boone, I don't think you understand the seriousness of your situation. Mr. Calder is not a man to be trifled with. If money won't persuade you, perhaps the law will." "What do you mean?" Eva asked, her voice sharp with fear. "Your father has filed charges of abduction against Mr. Boone," Reed said, addressing Eva but watching Micah's reaction. "The sheriff of Willow County is waiting outside with a warrant for his arrest." Micah felt the blood drain from his face. Abduction. It was a serious charge, one that could send him to prison for years. "That's a lie," Eva cried. "I went with Micah willingly. We're legally married." A marriage obtained under false pretenses, Reed countered smoothly. Mr. Calder will argue that you were coerced, manipulated by an employee who took advantage of your innocent nature. My father doesn't know anything about my nature, Eva spat. And no judge who heard the truth would believe such nonsense. Perhaps, Reed conceded, but the truth can be a difficult thing to establish in a courtroom, especially when one side has considerably more resources than the other. He turned back to Micah. Think about it, Mr. Boone. Prison is a hard place for a man. With no friends and no money, Micah felt sick. He had never considered that Silas Calder might use the law against him. It was a threat he had no defense against. No money for lawyers, no influential friends to speak on his behalf. I'll give you some time to reconsider, Reed said, moving toward the door. We'll be at the hotel until tomorrow morning. After that, the sheriff will do his duty. His cold eyes met Micah's. Choose wisely, Mr. Boone. The men left, and as soon as the door closed behind them, Eva collapsed against Micah, her body shaking. They can't do this, she whispered. They can't take you away from me. Micah held her close, his mind racing. They could try to run again, but for how long? Silas Calder had found them once. He would find them again. And next time there might not be an offer of money, just handcuffs and a prison cell. We'll figure something out, he promised, though he had no idea what that might be. Word spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, everyone in Copper Creek knew that Micah and Eva Boone were not who they claimed to be. That she was Evangeline Calder, daughter of the railroad king, and he was a stablehand who had run off with her. Some looked at them with suspicion, others with pity. Old man Jenkins hobbled over from his daughter's house, his face grim. Heard there's trouble, he said, settling into a chair in the stable. Want to tell me what's really going on? Micah and Eva exchanged a glance, then told him everything, truth this time. How Eva had come to the stables pretending to be someone else, how they had fallen in love, how they had fled rather than let her be forced into a marriage she didn't want. Jenkins listened without interruption, his weathered face giving nothing away. When they finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Well, he said finally, can't. Say I blame you for running. Man's got a right to marry where he loves. He looked at Eva. And a woman's got a right to choose her own husband, no matter what her daddy thinks. But what can we do? Eva asked. They'll arrest Micah if we don't. Go back. Jenkins rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Law's a tricky thing, he said. Works different for rich folks than it does for the likes of us. He looked at Micah. But sometimes standing your ground is better than running. Shows you ain't guilty of... Nothing. What are you suggesting? Micah asked. Face him head on, Jenkins said. Go see this father of hers. Make him understand you ain't giving up his daughter without a fight. Eva shook her head. You don't know my father. He doesn't listen to anyone. He doesn't compromise. Maybe not, Jenkins conceded. But hiding out here ain't solving nothing. He pushed himself up with a grunt. Think about it. Sometimes the only way past a thing is through it. After Jenkins left, Micah and Eva sat in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, Micah spoke. Maybe he's right, he said. Maybe we need to face your father directly. Micah. No, Eva protested. You don't know what he's capable of. I know. Exactly what he's capable of, Micah said. He's already threatening to have me arrested. What more can he do? He can separate us, Eva said, her voice breaking. He can make sure we never see each other again. Micah took her hands in his. Do you trust me? He asked. With my life, she replied without hesitation. Then trust me in this, he said. We can't keep running forever. Sooner or later we have to stand and fight for what we believe in, for what we want. Eva searched his face, her eyes troubled. And what if we lose? Then at least we'll know we tried, Micah said, that we didn't just give up without a fight. That evening, Micah went to the hotel where Reed and his men were staying. The clerk at the desk eyed Micah's worn clothes with suspicion, but directed him to Reed's room when Micah insisted it was important business. Reed opened the door, surprise flickering across his face when he saw Micah standing there. Mr. Boone, he said, I didn't expect to see you until morning. I want to speak with Silas Calder, Micah said without preamble. Face to face, Reed's eyebrows rose. Mr. Calder is a very busy man. He doesn't meet with... Well, with men in your position. Tell him I want to discuss his daughter's future, Micah pressed. Tell him I'm willing to come to him on his terms. Reed studied Micah for a long moment. And what about the offer? The $10,000? That's between me and Mr. Calder, Micah said firmly. A small smile played at the corner of Reed's mouth. I see. You think you can negotiate a better price directly with the old man? He nodded. Bold. Stupid, but bold. Will you arrange it? Micah asked, ignoring the jab. I'll send a telegram, Reed said. But don't expect much. Mr. Calder doesn't. Negotiate with kidnappers. I'm not a kidnapper, Micah said evenly. I'm Eva's husband. Reed waved a dismissive hand. A technicality that will soon be remedied. 3 days later, a telegram arrived for Reed. Micah and Eva waited anxiously in their room above the stable as Reed considered Micah's request. When a knock came at their door, they both jumped. It was Reed, his face impassive as always. Mr. Calder has agreed to meet with you, he said to Micah, at his private railcar which will arrive tomorrow at noon. He glanced at Eva. He expects to see his daughter as well. After Reed left, Eva paced the small room, her face pale with worry. This is a mistake, she said. My father won't listen to reason. He'll have you arrested the moment we step onto that railcar. Maybe, Micah admitted, but it's our only chance to end this once and for all. Eva stopped pacing and turned to face him. What if... She hesitated, her voice small. What if you took the money? The $10,000. You could start a new life somewhere else. Micah stared at her in disbelief. Without you? If it meant you were safe, free. She couldn't finish the thought. Micah crossed the room in 2 strides and took her face in his hands. Listen to me, Eva Boone. There is no life for me without you. No amount of money could ever replace what we have. If your father wants to separate us, he'll have to put me in the ground first. Tears spilled down Eva's cheeks. I'm so afraid, she whispered. Afraid of losing you. You won't lose me, Micah promised. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. The next day dawned clear and cool. Micah and Eva dressed in their best clothes, which weren't much, just the cleanest and least worn of their simple garments. They walked hand in hand to the small train station at the edge of town, where a private railcar now sat on a siding. It was like nothing Copper Creek had ever seen, a palace on wheels with polished brass fixtures and curtained windows. The Calder name was emblazoned on its side in gold leaf, a reminder of the power and wealth they were about to face. Reed was waiting for them on the small platform. Mr. Calder is ready to see you, he said, gesturing toward the railcar. I should warn you, he's not in a patient mood. Micah squeezed Eva's hand. Ready? He asked quietly. She nodded, her face set in determined lines. Ready. They followed Reed up the steps and into the railcar. The interior was as opulent as the exterior suggested. Plush velvet seats, mahogany paneling, crystal decanters of amber liquid set on a small table. And at the far end, seated in a high-backed chair like a king on his throne, was Silas Calder. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, and imposing even seated. His hair was silver, his face lined with age and authority, but it was his eyes that struck Micah most. Cold and calculating, the same shade of blue as Eva's, but without any of her warmth. Those eyes passed over Micah as if he were furniture, focusing entirely on Eva. Evangeline, Silas said, his voice deep and controlled. You look different. Eva stepped forward, still holding Micah's hand. Hello, Father? I've been worried sick, Silas continued, as if Micah weren't present. Running off without a word, living in squalor. His gaze flicked briefly to their joined hands, then away in disgust. It ends today. The carriage is waiting to take you home. I am home, Eva said quietly but firmly. Wherever Micah is, that's my home now. Silas finally acknowledged Micah with a cold stare. You, he said, the stablehand. Do you have any idea what you've done? The scandal you've caused? The damage to my daughter's reputation? Your daughter made her own choice, Micah replied, meeting the older man's gaze without flinching. She chose me. She chose freedom. Silas laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Freedom? Is that what you call living in a one-room hovel, doing menial labor for pennies? He shook his head. Evangeline was raised for better things. She was meant to marry into the Harrison family, to unite two of the most powerful names in the country. She was meant to be happy, Micah countered. To be loved for who she is, not what her name can buy. And you think you can make her happy? Silas demanded. A man with nothing to his name but the dirt under his fingernails. He already has, Eva interrupted, her voice stronger now. Micah loves me for myself, not for the Calder fortune. Can you say the same of Charles Harrison? Or of any of the men you paraded before me like prize cattle? Silas's face darkened. You're young, naive. You don't understand how the world works. I understand perfectly, Eva said. You built your empire by controlling everything and everyone around you. Well, you can't control me anymore, Father. I'm a grown woman legally married to the man I love. A marriage that will be annulled, Silas snapped. Unless... He turned to Micah, his voice suddenly businesslike. Reed tells me you refused my offer. $10,000 is a fortune for a man like you. What is it you want? More money? A position in one of my companies? I don't want your money, Micah said, and I don't want a job. I just want to live in peace with my wife. Impossible. Silas dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. Evangeline belongs with her family in her proper place in society. Her place is wherever she chooses it to be, Micah insisted. Silas's patience visibly snapped. Enough of this nonsense, he thundered, rising from his chair. Reed, fetch the sheriff. I want this man arrested immediately. Reed moved toward the door, but Eva stepped in his path. If you arrest Micah, you'll have to arrest me too, she said, for I'll tell everyone who will listen that I left willingly, that I married for love, that the great Silas Calder is so small a man he would rather see his daughter in jail than happy with someone he considers beneath her. Silas stared at his daughter, momentarily speechless. In all her life, Eva had never defied him so openly, so completely. You would choose him over your family? Silas asked, his voice suddenly quiet. Over everything I've built for you? You built railroads, Father, Eva said, her eyes filling with tears. But I found my home in a man who owns nothing but his truth. The words hung in the air between them, a declaration of independence more powerful than any legal document. For the first time, Micah saw uncertainty in Silas Calder's eyes. Into that moment of doubt, Micah spoke. Mr. Calder, he said, his voice respectful but firm. I know you want what's best for Eva. So do I. I may not have your wealth or power, but I swear to you that I will spend every day of my life trying to make her happy. He took a deep breath. But if you truly believe she would be better off without me, then I'll walk away. Micah, no, Eva gasped, turning to him in shock. I love you enough to want your happiness above all else, Micah told her gently, even if that means letting you go. You can't mean that, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I do, Micah said. If returning to your father's house, to the life you were born to, would truly make you happier than the life I can offer you, then that's what I want for you. He looked back at Silas. But the choice must be Eva's, not yours, not mine, hers. Silas. Calder looked from Micah to his daughter, his expression unreadable. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Eva stepped forward, placing herself physically between her father and her husband. I choose Micah, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I choose the life we're building together. And if you ever loved me, Father, not as the Calder heir but as your daughter, you'll respect that choice. Silas sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older, wearier. You're as stubborn as your mother was, he said, and for the first time there was something like respect in his voice. Yes, Eva agreed, and she would have understood. She married you when you were nothing but a track layer with dreams of building railroads. She chose love over her family's objections. She reached for Micah's hand again. I'm more my mother's daughter than you ever realized. Something shifted in Silas's eyes at the mention of his late wife. A memory, perhaps, of what it had been like to be young and in love, facing the disapproval of those with more money and power. Your mother was the only person who ever stood up to me, he said softly. Until now. Eva took a step toward her father. I'm not asking you to like my choice, she said. I'm just asking you to accept it, to let us live our lives without threats or bribes or legal action." Silas was quiet for a long time, looking at his daughter as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Finally he spoke. "The charges will be dropped," he said, the words clearly costing him effort. "You're free to live as you choose, Evangeline." "Eva," she corrected gently. "My name is Eva now." Silas nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Eva, then." He looked at Micah. "But know this, young man. If you ever harm her, if you ever make her regret this choice, there is nowhere on this earth you can hide from me." "I understand, sir," Micah said, but that day will never come." Silas turned away, a clear dismissal. "Reed will see you out," he said, his voice once again controlled and distant. "I have business to attend to." As they turned to leave, Eva paused at the door. "Goodbye, father," she said softly. Silas didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed at the finality in her voice. "Goodbye, Eva," he replied, just as softly. Outside in the clear autumn air, Eva took a deep breath as if emerging from a long dive underwater. "Is it over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Are we truly free?" Micah pulled her close, feeling the tension drain from his body. "I think so," he said. "Your father is many things, but I believe he's a man of his word." "I can't believe you offered to let me go," Eva said, looking up at him. "Did you mean it?" "Every word," Micah admitted. "I love you enough to want your happiness above everything else, even me." Eva shook her head in wonder. "And that, Micah, Boone, is exactly why I could never be happy without you." They walked back toward town, toward the small room above the stable that was now truly their home. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. "What happens now?" Eva asked as they reached the edge of town. Micah smiled down at her. "Now we build our life, together, one day at a time." Eva leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked. "I like the sound of that," she said. "One day at a time." Behind them, the Calder private rail car gleamed in the afternoon sun, a monument to wealth and power. But neither of them looked back. Their eyes were fixed on the road ahead, on the life they would create together. A life built not on a name or a fortune, but on something far more valuable: love, truth, and the freedom to choose their own path. A week had passed since the confrontation with Silas Calder. Life in Copper Creek had slowly returned to normal, though people still whispered when Micah and Eva walked by. Some looked at them with newfound respect for standing up to a man as powerful as Silas Calder. Others watched with suspicion, wondering if the Railroad King would truly keep his word. Micah and Eva tried to settle back into their routine, but something had changed. There was a restlessness in both of them, a sense that their story in Copper Creek had reached its end. "We need to move on," Micah said one evening as they sat at their small table, sharing a simple meal of stew and bread. "Your father may have agreed to leave us alone, but his shadow still hangs over this place." Eva nodded, pushing her food around her plate. "I've been thinking the same thing. Everyone here knows who I am now. They'll always see me as Evangeline Calder, not Eva Boone." "Where should we go?" Micah asked. Eva's eyes brightened with sudden inspiration. "West," she said, "to the ocean. You said once that everyone should see the ocean at least once in their life." Micah smiled, remembering that conversation in the hayloft, which seemed a lifetime ago. "The ocean it is, then." They spent the next few days preparing for their journey. Old man Jenkins was sorry to see them go, but understood their reasons. "Man's got to find his own place in the world," he said, pressing a small bag of coins into Micah's hand despite his protests. "Consider it payment for keeping the stable running while I was laid up." Martha from the general store gave them extra supplies for their journey. "You two got more courage than most folks I know," she told Eva. "Standing up to a man like Silas Calder takes guts." Word of their departure spread quickly through the small town. On the morning they were set to leave, several townspeople gathered to see them off. "You've got friends here," the blacksmith told Micah, shaking his hand. "If you ever need a place to come back to." It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Micah and Eva. They had found acceptance in this tiny community, something neither of them had expected when they first arrived. As the sun rose higher in the sky, they mounted their horses and rode out of Copper Creek, heading west toward the distant promise of the ocean. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since they fled the Calder estate, they were truly free. They traveled at an easy pace, no longer running from anything but moving towards something new. At night, they camped under the stars, planning their future beside small campfires. "We could build a house near the coast," Eva said one evening, her head resting on Micah's shoulder. "Something simple, with a garden and maybe some horses." "And children?" Micah asked quietly, his arm tightening around her. Eva looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes," she said, "a boy with your gentle hands and a girl with your thoughtful eyes." "What about your eyes?" Micah teased. "And your stubborn—" "Jin," Eva laughed. "Those too, though I hope they don't inherit my father's temper." The mention of Silas Calder no longer brought tension between them. It was as if the confrontation in the railcar had laid those ghosts to rest. Eva still wore the pearl earrings she had had since childhood, a gift from her mother, but the rest of her past she had left behind. On the third day of their journey, they reached the county line. It was marked by a simple wooden sign and a bridge that spanned a wide, fast-flowing river. "This is it," Micah said as they paused their horses at the bridge's edge. "Once we cross, we're beyond your father's territory." Eva nodded, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "The boundary of my old life," she said softly. She reached up and touched her pearl earrings, the last remnant of Evangeline Calder. They had been her mother's once, the only thing Eva had taken when she fled her father's house. With deliberate movements, she removed them, holding them in her palm for a long moment. The pearls gleamed in the sunlight, smooth and perfect like the life she had left behind. "I don't need these anymore," she said, rising in her stirrups. With a swift motion, she tossed the earrings into the rushing water below. Micah watched as the pearls disappeared beneath the surface, carried away by the current. "Are you sure?" he asked. "They were your mother's." "My mother would understand," Eva said, settling back in her saddle. "She married for love too, remember? Against her family's wishes." She smiled at Micah. "Besides, I have something far more precious now." She held up her wrist, where the braided leather bracelet Micah had made still circled her slender arm. It was worn now, darkened by sun and work, but she wore it like the finest jewelry. "This means more to me than all the pearls in the world," she said, "because you made it with your own hands, because it was a promise." Micah leaned over from his horse and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "A promise I intend to keep for the rest of my life," he said. Together they urged their horses forward, crossing the bridge that separated one world from another. On the far side they paused, looking back at the county they were leaving behind. "Do you have any regrets?" Micah asked, watching Eva's face carefully. She shook her head. "Not one," she said. "Everything I want is right here beside me." They rode on, following the road that wound through rolling hills covered in wildflowers. By midday they stopped to rest in a meadow beside a clear stream. Eva spread a blanket, while Micah tended to the horses. "What do you think the ocean will be like?" she asked, as they shared bread and cheese in the dappled shade of a tall oak. "Vast," Micah said, "endless blue as far as the eye can see. The smell of salt in the air, waves that never stop moving." "It sounds wonderful," Eva said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Not as wonderful as watching you see it for the first time," Micah replied. After their meal, they lay side by side on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky. A peaceful silence settled between them, the kind that comes only to people who are completely comfortable with each other. "I've been thinking," Micah said after a while. "About what?" "About names," he said, turning on his side to look at her. "You're not Evangeline Calder anymore, but sometimes I wonder if you're really Eva Boone either." She frowned slightly, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Eva was the name you gave me when you were pretending to be someone you weren't," Micah explained. "Evangeline was the name your father gave you, tying you to his world and his expectations." He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "So I've been wondering, who are you now, really, now that you're free of all that?" Eva considered the question, her eyes thoughtful. It was true that both names carried echoes of her past, one of deception, however well-intentioned, and one of the gilded cage she had escaped. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had the chance to discover who I really am, to choose my own name." Micah pulled her close, his forehead touching hers. "So, what should I call you now?" he asked softly. Eva smiled through sudden tears. "Call me yours," she whispered. The simple words hung in the air between them, more binding than any vow, more true than any name. Micah kissed her then, a kiss that sealed her words in both their hearts. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Mine," Micah said, as if testing the name on his tongue. "My wife. My heart." "Yours," she confirmed. "Now and always." They continued their journey westward, taking their time, enjoying the freedom of the open road. Along the way, they passed through small towns and settlements, sometimes staying for a day or two to earn money for supplies. Micah found work shoeing horses or helping farmers with their livestock. Eva took in sewing or helped in kitchens. No one in these distant places had heard of Silas Calder or his missing daughter. They were simply Mr. and Mrs. Boone, a young couple traveling west to see the ocean. In a town called Silver Springs, they stayed for nearly 2 weeks. The local blacksmith had broken his arm, and Micah's skills with horses were in high demand. They rented a small room above the general store and settled into a temporary routine. One evening, as Eva was washing dishes after their meal, she suddenly felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt around her, and she grabbed the edge of the basin to steady herself. "Eva!" Micah was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she said, her voice faint. "I just felt strange for a moment, like the floor was moving." Micah helped her to a chair, his face creased with worry. "You've been tired lately," he said. "Maybe we've been pushing too hard." Eva shook her head. "It's not that." A thought struck her, and her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Micah," she said slowly, I think I might be carrying a child." Micah's eyes widened. "A baby? Our baby?" Eva nodded, a smile spreading across her face despite her lingering dizziness. "I'm not certain, but it's been 2 months since my monthly time, and I've been feeling different, tired in the mornings. Certain smells make me queasy." Micah fell to his knees beside her chair, his hands covering hers where they rested on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Eva asked, suddenly uncertain. They had talked about children, but always as a distant future after they had settled somewhere, built a life. "Happy?" Micah repeated. "Eva, I've never been happier in my life." He looked up at her, his eyes shining. "But this changes things. We can't keep traveling, not with you carrying a child. We need to find a place to settle, a real home." Eva nodded. "The ocean will still be there," she said, "after the baby comes." "No," Micah said firmly. "You wanted to see the ocean, and see it you shall. We'll just have to find a place there, a town by the sea where we can build our home." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Our child should be born within sight of the ocean you've dreamed." So they left Silver Springs 2 days later, heading west with renewed purpose. They traveled more slowly now, stopping often to rest. Micah hovered over Eva, watching for any sign of discomfort or fatigue. "I'm not made of glass," she would tease when his protectiveness became too much. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Micah would reply. "Not your baby, this one is special." As they traveled, they began to hear stories of a town called Pacific Haven, a growing settlement on the coast that welcomed newcomers. It was said to be a place where a man's past didn't matter, only his willingness to work hard and contribute to the community. "It sounds perfect," Eva said, when a fellow traveler described it to them. "How far is it?" "Another week's journey. If the weather holds," the man told them. "My brother settled there last year, says it's the finest place he's ever lived." They set their course for Pacific Haven, hope growing with each mile. Perhaps this would be the place where they could finally put down roots, where their child could grow up free from the shadow of the Calder name. 6 days into their journey toward the coast, they made camp beside a small lake. The air had a different quality here, Eva noticed. Fresher somehow, with a hint of something new. Salt, Micah told her when she mentioned it. We're getting close to the ocean. You can smell it in the air. That night, as they sat beside their campfire, Eva felt the baby move for the first time, a faint flutter like butterfly wings inside her. She gasped, grabbing Micah's hand and placing it on her slightly rounded belly. I don't feel anything, he said, disappointed. It's too early for that, she laughed. But I felt it. Our baby moved, Micah. He kept his hand on her stomach anyway. As if by sheer will, he could sense the tiny life growing inside her. Do you think it's a boy or a girl, he asked. I don't know, Eva replied. What do you hope for? Micah considered the question seriously. A girl, he said finally, with your courage and your smile. I was thinking a boy, Eva said, with your gentle heart and strong hands. Either way, Micah said, this child will be loved, more loved than any child has ever been. The next morning dawned bright and clear. They packed up their camp and continued westward, following a trail that wound through a forest of tall pines. By midday, the trees began to thin, and the land sloped gently downward. And then suddenly, as they crested a hill, there it was, the ocean, stretching out before them in endless blue, meeting the sky at a horizon so distant it seemed like the edge of the world. Eva reined in her horse, her breath catching in her throat. Oh, Micah, she whispered, it's more beautiful than I ever imagined. The vastness of it was overwhelming. The way the sunlight danced on the water, creating a path of gold that seemed to lead to forever. The sound of waves breaking against the distant shore, a rhythm as old as time itself. Can we go closer? She asked, her voice filled with wonder. They rode down toward the shoreline, where the forest gave way to sandy dunes covered in waving grass. The sound of the waves grew louder, a constant rushing that filled the air with its music. Finally, they reached the beach itself, a wide expanse of sand that stretched in both directions as far as they could see. They dismounted, leaving the horses ground-tied in the grass, and walked together to the water's edge. Eva removed her boots and stockings, lifting her skirt slightly as she stepped into the cool water. The sensation of wet sand beneath her feet, of the water rushing around her ankles, made her laugh with pure delight. It's wonderful, she cried, turning to Micah with shining eyes. It's everything I dreamed it would be. Micah watched her, his heart so full it seemed it might burst. This was what he had wanted to give her from the moment she told him she had never seen the ocean. This joy, this freedom, this moment of pure happiness. Eva splashed in the shallows like a child, her hair coming loose from its pins and blowing in the salty breeze. Then she stopped suddenly, her hand going to her stomach. The baby kicked again, she said, looking down at the water swirling around her ankles. As if saying hello to the ocean, Micah joined her in the water, slipping his arm around her waist. Welcome home, little one, he said to her belly. This is where your story begins. They stood together at the edge of the continent, with the vast Pacific before them and the wide country they had crossed behind them. The past was behind them too, Evangeline Calder with her pearls and silks, the Stablehand who had lost his brother in the war, the railroad empire built on power and control. Here, with the endless rhythm of the waves as witness, they were simply themselves, a man and a woman, a family soon to be 3. Do you see that? Micah asked, pointing down the coastline to where a cluster of buildings was visible on a bluff overlooking the ocean. Pacific Haven? Eva guessed. Micah nodded. Our new home, he said. If you like it. I already love it, Eva replied. I loved it before I ever saw it. They returned to their horses and rode along the beach toward the town. As they drew closer, they could see that it was larger than they had expected. A proper town with a main street, a church steeple visible above. The rooftops, fishing boats bobbing in a protected cove. It's perfect, Eva said as they rode up the path that led from the beach to the town. People nodded to them as they passed, friendly faces curious about the newcomers, but not overly so. No one here would know the name Calder. No one would care that Micah had once been a stablehand, or that Eva had run away from a fortune. They found the town's only hotel, a modest building with clean rooms and a view of the harbor. After settling in, they explored the town, talking to shopkeepers and fishermen, getting a feel for the place that might become their home. "There's land for sale just north of town," the hotel owner told them over dinner in the small dining room. "Good soil, access to fresh water, and a view of the ocean that can't be beat. Owner's asking a fair price too." The next day they rode out to see the property. It was everything the hotel owner had promised. 5 acres of gently sloping land that ran from a stand of pine trees down to a cliff overlooking a private cove. A small cabin stood near the trees, weathered but sound. "What do you think?" Micah asked as they stood on the cliff, the wind from the ocean blowing Eva's hair around her face. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the blue of the sea below. "I think we've found our home," she said. The owner, an older man eager to return east to be near his grandchildren, accepted their offer without haggling. With the money Jenkins had given them and what they had saved from their work along the way, they had just enough to buy the land outright. "The cabin needs work," Micah acknowledged as they walked through it after signing the papers. "But it's a good start. We can add on as our family grows." Eva moved to the small window that faced the ocean. "Our child will grow up hearing the waves," she said, her hand resting on her stomach, "watching the sun set over the water every evening." "Free," Micah added, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her and their unborn child. "Free to be whoever they want to be." That night, they slept in their new home for the first time. The cabin was simple, just one room with a small stove, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. But it was theirs, their first real home. As moonlight spilled through the window, painting silver patterns on the rough wooden floor, Eva turned in Micah's arms to face him. "I've been thinking about names again," she said. "Oh?" Micah raised an eyebrow. "And what have you decided?" "For the baby," she clarified. "If it's a boy, I'd like to call him Joshua. After your brother." Micah's breath caught in his throat. "You would do that?" Eva nodded. "Your brother was a good man who died fighting for what he believed in. I'd be proud for our son to carry his name." "And if it's a girl?" Micah asked, his voice thick with emotion. Eva smiled. "Hope," she said, "because that's what she'll be. Our hope for the future." Micah pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair to hide the tears that threatened. "Joshua or Hope," he murmured. "Perfect names for our child." "Our child," Eva repeated, the words a prayer and a promise. Outside, the waves continued their endless rhythm against the shore below the cliff. Inside, in the small cabin that would soon be filled with the sounds of family, a man and woman held each other close, their hearts beating as one. They had crossed mountains and rivers, faced down power and wealth, left behind the only worlds they had ever known, all for the chance to write their own story, to be called by the names they chose for themselves. And as they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms with the sound of the ocean as their lullaby, they knew that the greatest journey was just beginning, a journey called home.